morning. I'm Linas Kojala, Director of Eastern Europe Studies Center, and today I have a great privilege of moderating a conversation on the future of democracy, which is a part of a big conference that is taking place currently in Vilnius, Lithuania, the Future of Democracy Forum. The first conversation is on a very essential topic for the region, hybrid threats on the eastern frontier, a response from the Western world. And for that, we have two excellent speakers who will share their insights and knowledge about the current threats and, of course, about the response to it. And I would like to present both of them. First of all, Professor Katarzyna Pisarska, who is co-founder and chair of Warsaw Security Forum, as well as Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation. She is also the vice president of the European Forum of Alpbach, the founder of the European Academy of Diplomacy, and expert of the World Economic Forum. She also holds academic positions at the Warsaw School of Economics and University of Southern California in Los Angeles. Welcome.
Thank you.
And
welcome.
Dr. Marie Mendras, she is professor at Sciences Po University and research fellow with the National Center for Scientific Research in France. She's been author of various books on Russia and authoritarian regimes, and she also regularly publishes on Russian domestic and foreign policy in the media, including pieces at Le Monde and other media outlets. So I'd like to start our conversation by asking you, Professor Pisarska, how do you see today's situation? Because probably when we talk about the authoritarian regimes and a threat to the Central and Eastern European countries, we talk about migration, weaponized migration, hybrid threat. So how do you see today's situation and obviously how we can imagine the future of it?
I think one of the things that surprises some of our more Western partners is that more and more we, at least in Poland, but I think also here in Lithuania, we feel that we are at war. And the war today is a completely different war. It's much more difficult to define and thus address because it's a hybrid war. And there's three major instruments right now used against Central Europe. These are, of course, used by Russia and by Belarus and the Lukashenko regime. It is the question of disinformation, this is the question of energy, and of course the question of migration. And I think the question of migration today, because we see this humanitarian crisis that is basically staged by Lukashenko at our borders unfold, it is an extremely difficult challenge for our societies. Because we have already experienced great polarization in most of Western societies over the last few years, and migration is yet another element that polarizes us inside. So the question how we should respond to it is not as obvious as one would think, because there are those who say we need to be tough, close the border, do not let anyone in. And there are those who show the humanitarian aspect of the problem and say, but these are also children, women, people in despair. They want a better life, but we should at least uphold our humanitarian principles. And that, of course, unfortunately, is used inside our own country by our political elites to actually gain electoral momentum. And that's exactly what regimes such as Lukashenko want. The role is not to endanger Poland's physical border, it's to spark the polarization and the divisions inside our society. So it's really a war that is happening in the minds of the people and not really the war that's happening on the border itself.
We've been talking about energy, we've been talking about other kind of threats for years. Is migration something unexpected? I mean, as a tool employed against Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, other Central and Eastern European countries, were we expecting something like that?
Well, migration is not unexpected. We know that the grimmest predictions say that in the next 50 years, 1/3 of the world population will be migrating because of climate change. So I think we understand the threat, but the challenge, I wouldn't say a threat, but a challenge. But I think it is the first time we clearly see it can be used as a weapon by a regime. I would not compare the situation here in Belarus with what happened in Turkey. There are those who try to compare and say, well, you know, the Erdogan also kind of forced concessions on the EU in terms of, you know, saying, I will keep the border closed, but you need to pay. This is not the same situation because Turkey has in fact been a destination place for almost 3 million migrants from the Middle East. Lukashenko has actually imported these migrants just to stage a show and just to use it as a tool of influence, not as so much on Poland, because I think on Poland he's trying to destabilize Poland and Lithuania, but he's trying to influence the European Union, to legitimize his own regime, to show, you know, if you don't back out, if you don't stop supporting Tikhanovskaya, I will continue doing you these type of surprises. So either you will acknowledge me as the leader of Belarus, or you will have a troublemaker that is more desperate probably than for example, Putin would ever be at this stage.
Dr. Mendras, I would like to ask you now. You've been researching Russia for decades. You've been writing books on Putin and how the Russian political system works, as well as how does that impact the foreign policy of Russia. When we talk about migration, we usually, of course, refer to Belarus. And Russia is seemingly an outside observer, or at least try to present itself as an outside observer. Is that the case, or is Russia involved in what's going on currently in the region?
Yeah, I will answer your question, but I would like first to say that what Putin and Lukashenko are doing, and have been doing for a number of years, is to wage a war scare, first and foremost, inside their own societies. So before we complain about destabilization of Poland, destabilization of the EU, which, as we saw recently, we are dealing with that. I mean, this, you know, chaos created by Lukashenko, I think it's almost over, and I think with Katarzyna will come to temporary conclusions. So let us remember that the problem with the two autocracies, with a man in Minsk that is still there and having control of Silaviki, a number of administrations and resources, this man would not be in Minsk had he not been supported by the Russian regime all along. And when Putin made the decision that he won't let Lukashenko fall, that was clear that Lukashenko would depend on money, energy, logistics from Moscow. And this is why we can say, without any doubt, that this crisis, this spoiling at the external border of the EU and border of Poland could not have happened had not the Russian regime supported Lukashenko. So the question is not who gave the order, who had this, crazy idea to. This is not important. We have to look at just the very real fact that Putin and Lukashenko now are left with what I would call rogue methods of exercising power inside their own countries and in neighbor countries. And we need to have, of course, an excellent immediate response policy, which I hope we can discuss further, but which has been really, I think, a good surprise. It has been a good surprise, and it was clear that the propaganda just would not pass. But we also have to think medium term, which is that now an emergency is to support Belarusian society and representation in exile so that Lukashenko does not stay much longer in Minsk. The threat is rogue methods of government and conducting political international negotiations. Let's get into this. How to do this better.
Do you think it's acknowledged in Western capitals you cannot unlink Russia from Belarus also in
Yes.
these kind of matters? Yes,
absolutely. It's interesting, after I wrote this paper for Le Monde just a few days ago, I got many very positive messages, and some of them were asking, but can you prove it? And so I realized that we need to do more pedagogy, more explanation, which is, I think, exactly what we're doing. In fact, I was defending the same analysis in 2012-2013 when Bashar al-Assad managed to stay in power in Damascus, when it was clear in the summer of 2012. I was in Moscow at the time and spoke to all the good experts. They didn't believe that Bashar al-Assad could stay in power and would be fully supported by the Kremlin. And they were wrong. The best experts in Moscow were wrong. So I think we have had many of those cases where, of course, Moscow denies what it's doing. It's saying, I'm only doing humanitarian, or what they say with our current crisis is, well, we didn't do anything. The EU, Poland started it. So this is also a subject of concerns, especially today at our Future of Democracy Forum, is how we debunk the fake narratives.
Yeah. That's a very great topic, I mean, the information landscape, and I would like to come back to Professor Pisarska. How would you describe it in this current crisis? Who is winning the information warfare? Because there's quite a lot of criticism towards Poland and some other EU countries, because maybe journalists are not allowed to work on the border and etc. So we quote Belta and other kind of state sources from Belarus.
This is extremely a very complicated landscape, because on the one side you have to have the aspects of security, of border protection, and that requires also, the ability for our soldiers, border guards to do their job. But at the same time, it's critical for us to be transparent on what we're doing and we're not doing. And I think it has been a controversial decision by my own government to keep the press away from the border. This is a zone that nobody can enter. And of course, Lukashenko is using this ruthlessly by allowing CNN, BBC from his side of the border. And you, of course, see the pictures from the camp, or you see, people that are being pushed, and you don't see how the Belarusian regime actually is trying to destroy the border actively and actually pushes the people the other way. So that information aspect is key, and I don't think we're doing a great job. But this is an element that I think is under revision currently in Warsaw. There are ideas to bring a selected group of outlets, news outlets, to be able to approach and work on the border with the soldiers, and I think it is absolutely necessary. But of course, this transparency also means that many of our own citizens, see the people for whom they are, migrants, children, women, and so on. And that also weakens, or might potentially weaken, our response or resilience. And again, it's a very difficult thing, because there is an ethical and there is the security aspect. And I don't think anyone has the right answer, the exact answer of how to deal with it, because that's what exactly Lukashenko wants. He wants you to have this moral, let's let them all in and allow them, and let's open the border. But at the same time, opening the border will also lead to further escalation and further groups coming in, and that's also in a way allowing the blackmail he's doing to succeed. So I think this is a huge challenge we're facing right now.
Dr. Mendras, how does it look from the Paris perspective, the information landscape on this particular crisis?
Well, I think as of today, most reasonable media, serious media, acknowledge that Lukashenko's blackmail has failed. completely failed. The question in Paris still is, how do we deal with the Kremlin? I think there is a clear understanding that Vladimir Putin is cornered. He can blackmail, he can mass his men at the eastern border of Ukraine, he can build fake narratives, he can support so-called populist movements or let's say, or leanings in our countries. That's really all he can do. The problem we have, and I think Warsaw has, and all our capitals have, is that in Moscow we only have one interlocutor, and this is Vladimir Vladimirovich. Even if you talk to Sergei Lavrov, you don't know what authority he has. So we are stuck with an authoritarian, more and more dangerous leader, who is making harebrained decisions, and often, from my point of view, making mistakes. And so, the more he makes mistakes, the more he feels besieged, the more his situation at home is deteriorating, the more he has to deal with men like Lukashenko, but has no good ally, and is more and more isolated, the bigger the challenge for all of us. Because we have, well, in France, certainly there is a part of the political class that continues to say, let's not antagonize Vladimir Putin, it may get worse. And our role as good experts of Russia and European security is to say, whatever we do, Vladimir Putin will not be happy. So let's think in terms of what our priorities are, what our capacity is, and how to continue what we've been doing in recent years, but do it better and stronger, which is think together, make decisions together in Europe or NATO, and always support our neighbors and allies in face of this destabilizing strategy coming from Russia.
Yeah. And if I can add one thing, I think we have to also remember, apart from what has been said, supporting also the civil society of Belarus, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and all the people that, not forgetting almost 700 political prisoners right now that are currently held in Minsk and other places. But we also have to remember that there are countries that are fighting that war for us as well on our borders, and this is Ukraine. And if we don't, it's important to support our NATO allies. It's important to have unity inside of the European Union. I think both myself and Marie see this kind of more and more coherent Russian policy over the last 10 years. Yes, it's a completely different picture than pre-Crimea today. I think nobody believes today when Putin says we're not there or we don't know anything about this, or, it's Lukashenko himself doing. Nobody believes when he says these type of things. So we've become much more realist. However, we still fail to fully support Ukraine and fail to fully acknowledge what happened there in 2014, that we had an annexation of a country's territory, that we had a fake war waged on its borders, and this war is still a hot conflict that actually can go away like this if Vladimir Putin decides it goes away. So I think we need to remember about Ukraine, about Georgia, and not allow to fall into what Putin wants, into this realist idea of sphere of influences. because that's his ball game. That is his end game. I think there is one thing that would make him happy. If he would sit at the table with China and the United States and say, you know, this is my territory, this is my sphere of influence, and let it be, you know, Ukraine, Belarus, maybe, you know, Poland, Lithuania, who knows where we will be in a few decades. And this is your sphere of influence and a big concert of powers. That is his idea. But we can't accept that. That is unacceptable.
The problem is that Vladimir Putin no longer has a sphere of influence. I mean, he's been destroying it consistently.
Absolutely.
You know, now he has antagonized Ukrainians who didn't want to be antagonized by the Russians. No. He has antagonized the Belarusians, the Georgians, now the Armenians as well. And he tries to antagonize other nations in Europe. So there is not even a talk about Russia's sphere of influence. It's no longer there. It's a sphere of spoiling. A sphere of destabilization in the confrontation with Western countries and Western organization. And from what I hear from my friends in Russia or outside Russia, but still have very close contacts with Moscow elites, let's say, they do believe that even in the Kremlin, nobody believes that there is a possibility of rebuilding some kind of community of influence in former republics of the Soviet Union. And the conclusion, I think, is that Vladimir Putin is in survival mode. And he's not a conqueror. He has no grand strategy, no great ambition. He is more, in fact, in a defensive position. But when an autocrat is in a defensive position, he has to look offensive.
Yeah, and that makes him the more dangerous, I think, especially the worse the situation economically will look. And we know that the situation for an average Russian right now is grim, to say the least. And this model of prosperity that has been functioning since 2000 around high prices of oil and gas has actually been gone since 2013, 14, then you constantly need some kind of another way of uniting Russians again around a cause. And even his attempts to make the West be that enemy, this has not succeeded. The recent polls have shown that less and less Russians actually believe the West is the enemy. Even less and less Russians believe that the United States is the enemy. Yes, so even that is waning. So he has to find another way to reinvent himself and the legitimacy of the regime. If it's not economically delivering, it has to deliver in terms of political greatness. And this is why the regime is so dangerous, because I agree, it is a survival mode, and these are the moments where such leaders are completely unpredictable.
Well, yeah, there are certainly multiple other aspects that we should touch upon, but I think this is a very good conclusion. We've started off with a negative perspective, an attack, and concluded that the West is not necessarily losing out, especially in the medium or long term. And I would like to thank Professor Katarzyna Pisarska and Dr. Mendras for sharing insights on this very important topic. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.